Why was she always the one they overlooked? Paige Lawson stood in the center of the forward operating base's dining hall, the clang of trays and the murmur of soldiers her usual soundtrack. To everyone else, she was just the cook. The woman with sandy hair always pulled into a tight ponytail. The one who could somehow serve 200 meals before dawn and keep the base running as if food itself were another form of ammunition. But when she caught her own reflection in the stainless steel surface of the serving line, she felt the truth sitting heavy in her chest. No matter how hard she worked, no matter what else she could do, nobody really saw her. They didn't see the way her hazel eyes tracked details in the room like a hunter scanning for movement in the trees. They didn't see the calluses from rifle grips hidden beneath flour-dusted hands. They didn't see that her upbringing on a stretch of Wyoming land had shaped her for war in ways this base would never guess. They only saw the apron, the ladle, the woman behind the steam trays. And yet, Paige had never told them otherwise. She had learned to swallow the sting, to play her part without complaint, to answer politely when a passing SEAL, hardened from countless raids, smiled with that casual condescension and said, "Best damn chicken I've had in months, Lawson. You could open a restaurant someday." A compliment meant as praise, but it landed like a dismissal. They respected her skill with spices more than her skill with steel. She had forced a smile, nodded, and returned to her work, hiding the truth behind her silence. Because how could she explain that she could fire tighter groups at 800 meters than half the men polishing their rifles outside the wire? That she could move unseen through rough country because her father, a Marine sniper instructor, had made it her childhood instead of her choice? No, Paige kept those truths to herself. Because she knew what happened to women who tried to claim more. She had seen the way female Marines, soldiers, sailors fought twice as hard for half the respect. She had chosen the culinary route to bypass the endless uphill war over whether she was enough. She had figured, better to deploy as support, to serve in her own quiet way, than to break herself proving something nobody wanted to believe anyway. But there was always that ache, that question that whispered at the edges of her thoughts. When it mattered, would anyone ever know what she was really capable of? The answer came on a Tuesday. It began with the crackle of the loudspeaker. All personnel, this is base command. SEAL Team 7 has been ambushed. 12 personnel confirmed captured. Location, enemy compound 5 kilometers northwest. Quick reaction force mobilizing. Stand by. The words punched the mess hall into silence. Forks froze. Cups halted halfway to lips. Soldiers who lived their lives in danger still paused at the weight of what they'd just heard. SEALs didn't get captured. Not alive. If 12 of them were being held, it meant something had gone terribly wrong. Paige set down the ladle in her hand. She didn't even realize she was holding her breath. She listened, because cooks always listened, blending into the background where commanders thought their words vanished. The radio chatter bleeding through walls, the muttered conversations of operators moving fast. She pieced together the truth before most had a chance to absorb the shock. The compound, the numbers. 50 enemy fighters dug in tight, 20 clustered around the prisoners, 30 guarding the outer perimeter, and most damning of all, the clock. Execution within hours, cameras rolling. A propaganda spectacle, brutal and certain. The quick reaction force was already gearing up. Helicopters were being scrambled, but 3 hours was the earliest anyone could get there. 3 hours. Paige closed her eyes for a moment. She knew what that meant. She had studied the terrain on her morning perimeter runs, the rises of land, the routes most teams would use. She knew 3 hours was too late. Those men, dismissed from the mess hall like she was invisible, would be executed long before the rescue birds ever lifted off the pad. Her heart hammered, her palms itched, something uncoiled in her chest that she had kept locked away for years. The weight of decision pressed in, and for the first time since enlisting, she stopped hiding who she was. She didn't ask permission, she didn't wait for orders, she moved. The kitchen behind her faded as she strode out. Her boots pounded across gravel. She slipped into her quarters with the urgency of someone who knew hesitation was death. In seconds, she was trading her apron for combat utilities, stripping off the uniform of a cook and donning the weight of someone who understood the field. Body armor cinched tight, M4 checked, loaded, extra magazines tucked into pouches, an assault pack filled with supplies she knew she might never get to use if the mission went wrong. Paige caught her reflection in the mirror, not the cook, not the overlooked support staff, a soldier, a hunter, a daughter of a Marine sniper who had taught her the patience of stillness and the courage to act when others hesitated. Her pulse was steady now, too steady. She stepped outside and nearly collided with Lieutenant Caroline Voss. "Lawson," Voss's eyes widened. "What in God's name are you doing? You're not QRF. You're not even cleared for this." Paige's voice was calm, even. "Ma'am, those SEALs don't have 3 hours. They'll be dead before the birds are off the ground. I can't sit here and watch that happen." "You're a culinary specialist," Voss snapped, disbelief and fear wrestling in her tone. "This isn't your job. You'll be killed before you even reach the compound." Paige held her gaze, her hazel eyes for once unflinching and unapologetic. "With respect, ma'am, it is my job. My father taught me to hunt elk across terrain rougher than this. I've shot cleaner than half the men outside the wire. If I don't try, 12 Americans die tonight. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do." Silence stretched between them, the kind of silence where authority trembled beneath the weight of conviction. Voss saw it, the resolve that could not be ordered away. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she reached into her belt, pulled out a small radio and pressed it into Paige's hand. "Officially, Lawson, I'm ordering you to stand down. But unofficially, if you're going anyway, keep me updated. I'll cover as long as I can." Paige closed her fingers around the radio. The small gesture felt like the only lifeline she'd been given. "Thank you, ma'am." "Bring them home," Voss whispered, "and bring yourself back too." Paige didn't answer. She only turned, moving fast, her steps light but certain. The world beyond the wire was a predator's world, shadows, silence, and endless threat. She knew it well. She had grown up inside it. Wyoming had been her crucible, its wilderness teaching her that rushing meant dying, that every step carried consequence. She slipped low, hugging the earth, using terrain as cover, every pause deliberate. Her breath was even, her heart measured. 2 hours later, Paige lay prone on a ridge, her scope fixed on the compound. 50 men. She counted them in clusters, her mind compartmentalizing threat after threat. And in the center, 12 prisoners, bound, beaten, alive for now. A knife tightened in her gut. She felt the seconds like a blade pressing deeper. They would die if she waited. The quick reaction force was still 2 hours out. Her hand tightened around the radio. She whispered, "This is Lawson. I have eyes on target, 12 prisoners alive, 50 hostiles, execution prep underway, going in." A pause crackled back, Voss's voice thin with fear. "Lawson, don't wait for support, please." Paige exhaled slow. "Negative, ma'am, if I wait they die. I'm going in." She clicked the radio silent. And in that moment, on that ridge, with dusk falling and the weight of 50 enemies between her and 12 bound Americans, Paige Lawson shed the last fragments of who the Navy thought she was. Not a cook. Not support. Not overlooked. Just a single figure with an M4, a hunter's patience, and the resolve to walk into hell alone. And she moved. How far could one person go before the world broke them? Paige's boots sank into the loose earth as she crept forward, the taste of dust thick in her mouth. The compound ahead glowed faintly with scattered lanterns and dim fires, the enemy's shadows crossing in unpredictable rhythms. 50 fighters, more than enough to overwhelm a dozen armed SEALs, let alone one woman carrying a rifle and her will. But Paige didn't think of the odds. She thought of the ropes biting into the wrists of men who hadn't deserved this. She thought of the camera lenses being assembled, ready to make their deaths a showpiece. Her body moved on instinct, the kind her father had built into her bones long before she wore a uniform. She slid down a slope, then froze, listening. A murmur in the distance, boots scraping rock, the faint metallic rattle of weapons, 2 guards on patrol. Her hazel eyes flicked ahead and caught the movement. One taller, one younger, both careless with their steps. They weren't expecting anyone. Why would they? Who would be insane enough to walk into a fortress alone? Paige's hand tightened around her weapon. She waited. The patrol passed, their shapes vanishing into shadow. She could have taken them, a clean double shot, but patience mattered more than pride. Her father's voice, gruff and steady, whispered in her head, "Don't pull the trigger unless the ground itself demands it. Silence wins fights before bullets do." She kept crawling. By the time she found her vantage point, her chest was coated in dust, her knees bruised raw, and her heart pressed steady against her ribs. From here she could see the perimeter clearly. Towers, sentries at gates, clusters of fighters smoking and laughing in the dark. Inside the courtyard, the SEALs sat slumped against each other, bound by ropes, their faces pale under bruises. Alive, but not for long. Paige steadied her breathing. She unshouldered the rifle, adjusted her scope, and drew a bead on the first tower guard. A long pause, the kind where silence seemed to stretch across the desert itself. Then she squeezed. The man crumpled without a sound, dropping out of sight. One. She didn't linger. She slid a meter left, sighted on the gate sentry, and squeezed again. The body folded into the dust. 2. Every shot was deliberate, every move calculated. Paige was not fighting 50 men at once. She was fighting moments, fragments of opportunity, carving gaps in their defenses the way she'd carved paths through elk herds with her father. It wasn't glory, it wasn't bravado, it was survival disguised as patience. Over 30 minutes, she stitched chaos into the compound's edges. 8 men down, 8 pieces quietly removed from the board, and still the heart of the beast beat strong in the center, where 20 fighters surrounded the prisoners. That was the wall she couldn't ignore, the wall between life and execution. Paige shifted into a shallow trench, sighted the courtyard, and froze. Her finger hovered on the trigger. Her breath hitched, because this wasn't a hunt anymore. These weren't faceless targets. They were men sitting on the ground, wrists bound, heads bowed, men who had dismissed her as the cook days earlier. Men who had laughed in the mess hall, never realizing the quiet figure serving their food was already capable of outshooting them. Would they even believe it was her if she saved them? Would it matter? Her heart squeezed tight, but the thought dissolved as quickly as it came. She didn't need them to believe. She just needed them to live. She waited until the guards shifted, their formation thinning for only a breath. Then she opened fire. Her rifle cracked again and again, precise, brutal. 6 men dropped in the span of seconds, chaos erupting in the courtyard. Fighters shouted, dove for cover, unsure where death was coming from. Paige never stayed still. She fired, rolled, slid, fired again. Dust bit her throat, her elbows burned, but her mind was ice. And then she grabbed the radio. Her voice was calm, almost cold. "SEAL Team 7, this is friendly forces. Cut your bonds, move to the south wall, covering fire inbound." Inside the courtyard, Chief Ramirez froze, staring at the source of the voice. He didn't recognize it, couldn't, but he knew an opening when he heard one. He jerked his hands, tearing at the ropes, finally slipping one wrist free. His knife snapped open, cutting his teammates loose in rapid succession. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Fighters screamed, firing blindly into shadows. Paige answered with clean, measured shots, keeping their heads down as the SEALs scrambled. For the first time since the ambush, hope flickered in their eyes. Ramirez pushed his men toward the south wall, his body aching from captivity but his instincts fierce as ever. Behind him, the cook's voice echoed again through the radio. "Move, now, I'll keep them off you." The absurdity of it cut through his mind like a blade. The cook, he shoved it away. Questions didn't matter. Survival did. The seals surged, ducking and weaving, moving like men reborn. Paige laid down fire with the precision of someone who had drilled every shot for years. She watched them reach the wall, scramble over, one by one. And then Chief Ramirez landed on the far side and saw her. The cook, standing there in combat kit, dust streaked across her face, eyes sharp, rifle scarred from sustained fire. Calm, deadly, real. For a long heartbeat, words wouldn't come. Finally, he rasped, "Lawson, what the hell are you doing here?" Her answer was simple. "Rescuing you, now move, they're reforming." He stared, but she cut him off with a sharper tone. "With respect, Chief, we argue later. Right now we live. Follow me." And they did. Through gullies and brush, through terrain she had memorized with every morning run, Paige guided them away from death. Her voice was steady, her movements clean, as if she had been leading combat teams her entire career. Ramirez found himself next to her, his disbelief only growing. "You move like an operator," he muttered under his breath, still firing in short bursts as they retreated. "Where the hell did you learn this?" "My father was a Marine sniper instructor," Paige said flatly, eyes never leaving the path. "I grew up in Wyoming. I know how to move unseen. I know how to shoot." "Then why the hell are you a cook?" She glanced at him just long enough for him to see the steel in her eyes. "Because troops need to eat, Chief, and I can cook. Doesn't mean I can't fight when it matters." Ramirez had no answer. He only ran beside her, his men falling in behind, every one of them alive because of the woman they had once dismissed with a smile over a plate of chicken. By the time they reached the rally point, the desert air was thick with dust and gunfire echoing faintly behind them. The SEALs dropped into defensive positions automatically, but the truth sat heavy in all of them. They were breathing because one woman hadn't waited for permission. Paige crouched, scanning the horizon, her rifle steady, her breathing controlled. To them she looked unshakable, but inside, under the armor, her heart was trembling, not from fear, from the weight of what she had just done, from the knowledge that she had crossed a line she could never step back from. She had revealed herself. No longer invisible, no longer just the cook. And whether the Navy rewarded or destroyed her for it, she knew one thing with unshakable clarity: she had chosen right. Because 12 men were alive tonight. And that was worth everything. What happens when the truth is too heavy to ignore? The desert night trembled with the thump of rotor blades. Dust lifted in choking waves as the quick reaction force helicopters descended onto the rally point. The SEALs, bruised and half-starved, straightened like men suddenly younger. Rescue had arrived at last. For them, this was the sound of survival. But for Paige Lawson, kneeling low behind her rifle, the pounding rotors didn't feel like salvation. They felt like judgment. She stayed in position, eyes scanning the ridgeline, waiting for any sign of pursuit. Every heartbeat told her the enemy would regroup, would push after them, would realize 12 prisoners had slipped through their fingers. And yet no silhouettes appeared. No shouts. No gunfire. Only the wind. Only the chopping echo of the helicopters settling down. The SEALs broke from cover and moved toward extraction. Their bodies moved like muscle memory, but their eyes, every single one of them, kept flicking back to her. To the woman they had brushed past in the mess hall. The cook. The one now standing guard over them with dust streaked across her face and the calm focus of someone who belonged in a firefight. Chief Ramirez came up beside her. His voice was low, heavy. "Lawson, I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Paige replied, scanning the dark horizon. "Just get on the bird. You've got men who need to see home again." Ramirez hesitated. It was such a small moment, barely 2 seconds, but in it lay the weight of everything he couldn't put into words. Gratitude, shame, awe. He gave a tight nod, then signaled his men forward. The QRF commander, Lieutenant Commander Miranda Shaw, jumped off the lead helicopter as it touched ground. She strode fast, weapon low, eyes sweeping the perimeter until they landed on the rescued SEALs. Relief flickered over her features, quick, fierce. Then her gaze shifted to Paige. The sight stopped her cold. "Lawson," she demanded, disbelief ringing through the dust. "What the hell are you doing here?" Paige rose slowly, slinging her rifle. Her throat was dry. Confirming 12 prisoners freed, all accounted for. Shaw stared at her, the confusion raw. She looked from Paige to Ramirez as if searching for sense in a senseless picture. "Chief, explain." Ramirez's voice was rough, still edged with exhaustion. "Ma'am, Lawson infiltrated the compound alone, eliminated guards, cut us loose, led us here. Without her, we'd be dead." Shaw blinked hard, her composure trembling. "She's a cook." "Yes, ma'am," Ramirez said, his tone clipped but certain. "A cook who just pulled off a solo rescue doctrine says is impossible." Silence pressed in around them, broken only by the rotor wash. Shaw's expression shifted, calculation racing behind her eyes. She looked at Paige again, longer this time, as though seeing her for the first time. Then she spoke, her words colder now, more measured. "Lawson, you're out of your lane. You abandoned your post without authorization, engaged in combat operations outside your billet. This is going to be dealt with." Paige stood straighter. Dust clung to her face, sweat stung her eyes, but her voice was even. "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Shaw studied her a long moment. "Get on the bird, we'll sort this out back at Atlas." The ride back was suffocating. Inside the helicopter, the SEALs sat strapped in, helmets rattling, eyes darting toward her and then away again. They wanted to speak, but words failed them. How did you thank someone you, dismissed for weeks, only to discover she had carried your lives in her hands? Paige sat silent, her rifle across her knees, her gaze fixed on the blackness outside. The vibration of the rotors shook through her bones, but she didn't feel it. What she felt was the weight of the reprimand already hanging over her. She had done what she set out to do. They were alive. That mattered most. But she also knew the military didn't forgive disobedience, no matter how righteous the outcome. When they landed at FOB Atlas, floodlights bathed the landing zone. Medics rushed forward, pulling the SEALs into triage. Commanders barked orders, moving men and equipment. In the chaos, Paige felt strangely apart, like a ghost watching a scene unfold that she no longer belonged to. Lieutenant Caroline Voss was waiting at the edge of the pad. Her face was pale, strained with hours of fear. The moment her eyes found Paige, something in her tightened. She strode forward, grabbing her arm. "God damn it, Lawson," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You actually did it." Paige gave a single nod. Her voice was flat, almost detached. 12 are alive." Voss looked at her, really looked, and saw the dust, the sweat, the rifle that still smelled of spent rounds. Her eyes shone with something Paige couldn't name. Admiration, fear, both. Then Voss whispered, "Stay sharp. This is going to get ugly." Paige didn't answer. She already knew. The inquiry began the next morning. She was summoned to a dim room, its walls lined with peeling paint, a table in the center, officers sitting stiff in their chairs. At the head was Captain Stephen Caldwell, a man whose silver hair spoke of decades in uniform and whose expression was carved from stone. "Petty Officer Lawson," he began, his tone clipped, "you are here to explain your actions during the unauthorized infiltration of an enemy compound last night." Paige sat rigid, her hands clasped in her lap. "Yes, sir." "Let me be clear," Caldwell continued. "You abandoned your assigned duties. You entered combat operations without clearance. You risked not only your life but the mission integrity of this base. Do you deny any of that?" "No, sir." "And yet," he leaned forward, voice sharp, 12 SEALs are alive because of what you did." The room went silent. Every officer's gaze drilled into her. She felt the heat of it, the disbelief, the unease. Paige's chest rose and fell once. Then she spoke, her voice steady, carrying no pride, no defense, only truth. "Sir, if I had waited for orders, they would have been executed. I acted because time didn't allow anything else." Caldwell studied her, eyes narrowing. His silence stretched long enough for Paige to feel her pulse in her throat. Finally, he sat back, exhaling. "We'll hear from the rescued team." One by one, the SEALs gave testimony. Each described her movement, her shooting, her command under fire. Some used the word ghost, others sniper. Chief Ramirez's words struck deepest. "Sir," he said, voice firm, "Lawson neutralized 8 hostiles on approach, provided precision covering fire, and executed the extraction. What she did matched or exceeded expectations for trained operators. She is the reason we are alive." Caldwell's jaw flexed. He turned back to Paige. "Why did no one know you had these skills?" Paige hesitated. Her hands tightened in her lap. The truth rose like a tide, raw and unvarnished. "Because nobody asked, sir. Because everyone saw culinary specialist and assumed that was all I was." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Caldwell's eyes lingered on her, unreadable. "We'll deliberate," he finally said. "Dismissed." That night Paige lay awake in her bunk. The base around her had returned to its rhythms, vehicles rumbling, voices carrying in the dark. But for her, sleep was impossible. Her mind replayed every second of the rescue, every shot fired, every face she had guided out of hell. And beneath it all was the gnawing truth. She had done the right thing, and yet the system might still break her for it. Was that what service meant? That you could risk your life to save 12 others and still be punished for disobedience? That rules mattered more than results? She closed her eyes. The doubts pressed hard, heavy. But then she remembered the moment in the courtyard, the SEALs cutting their bonds, their eyes lifting with sudden hope because she had been there. That was the truth she would hold on to. Whatever came next, nothing could take that away. Because sometimes, the cook was the one who kept the war from swallowing men whole. And for once, Paige Lawson wasn't invisible anymore. What price would she pay for stepping out of the shadows? The inquiry chamber grew colder with each passing day. Officers filed in and out, voices sharp, arguments clashing, as though Paige Lawson herself was less a sailor and more a question they couldn't answer. She had crossed a line. She had done what doctrine said was impossible. And now the Navy had to decide whether to punish her, celebrate her, or both. Paige sat at the center of it all, spine straight, hands folded tight in her lap. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She told the truth when asked, nothing more. But inside, behind her calm mask, storms churned. Every night in her bunk, she replayed the same thought. What if they strip me down to nothing? What if the only thing the Navy remembers is that I disobeyed? And yet every time doubt pressed too hard, she remembered the SEALs. Their eyes, wide with shock and relief as they slipped out of their bonds. Chief Ramirez staring at her across the dust, unable to reconcile the cook with the soldier who had just saved his life. Those faces gave her anchor. Whatever judgment fell, she had made her choice. Still, the Navy wasn't gentle. Captain Caldwell led the proceedings with an iron calm that left no room for comfort. His voice cut sharp across the table one morning as he leveled his gaze at her. "Petty Officer Lawson, by leaving your post and engaging in unauthorized combat, you directly violated Articles 86 and 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Do you deny this?" "No, sir," she said quietly. "Then why should this board consider your actions anything but insubordination?" The silence pressed heavy, every officer waiting. Paige met Caldwell's eyes. Her throat tightened, but her voice didn't waver. "Because if I hadn't acted, 12 Americans would be dead." A murmur rippled down the table. Some officers leaned back, uncomfortable. Others narrowed their eyes, unimpressed. Caldwell, unreadable as ever, only tapped his pen once against the folder in front of him. "Very well," he said. "We'll hear further testimony." The SEALs filed in over the next 2 days, each man carrying the weight of survival in his posture. They gave their accounts one by one, voices low, sometimes cracking. They spoke of being bound, beaten, certain of death. They spoke of the sudden eruption of fire from the shadows, guards collapsing, ropes cut loose. They spoke of Lawson's voice on the radio, calm, commanding, pulling them toward life. Chief Ramirez's testimony hit the room like a hammer. "Sir," he said, his voice rough but unwavering, "Lawson did what the quick reaction force couldn't. She acted immediately, alone, and saved 12 operators from execution. What she did was extraordinary. She doesn't just deserve recognition. She deserves respect." Caldwell leaned forward, steepling his hands. "Chief Ramirez, are you suggesting that one culinary specialist outperformed an entire SEAL platoon?" Ramirez's eyes flicked toward Page, then back to Caldwell. "I'm suggesting she did what none of us could at that moment. And I'll say it plain, without her, we'd be corpses on propaganda tapes right now." The weight of his words sank into the room. Officers shifted in their chairs. Some scribbled notes. Some stared hard at Page, as if trying to reconcile the woman sitting in her pressed uniform with the phantom warrior described. When the SEALs left, the chamber was heavier than ever. Later that evening, Lieutenant Caroline Voss found Page sitting alone outside the barracks. The desert air was cool, the stars sharp against the black sky. Page's posture was rigid, her hands resting loosely on her knees, but her eyes were far away. "You've shaken the whole damn system, Lawson," Voss said quietly, dropping down onto the step beside her. Page glanced at her, then back at the sky. "Not sure that's a good thing, ma'am." "Maybe not for you," Voss admitted. "The Navy doesn't like being shown it missed something, especially when it's this big." She paused, studying Page's face. "But you did more than rescue those men. You proved the way we define people by their titles is broken." Page's jaw tightened. "Broken systems don't thank people for pointing out their flaws." Voss smiled faintly. "No, they don't. They punish them, and then, sometimes, they change." Page let the words hang between them. She wanted to believe that was possible, but she also knew the Navy was a machine that valued order above all. Machines didn't change easily. The inquiry dragged on. Witnesses from the base spoke. Some praised her, some questioned her sanity. One logistics officer declared flatly, "She got lucky. If one thing had gone wrong, we'd be burying 13 bodies instead of 12 rescues." Page didn't flinch at the criticism. She simply absorbed it like a soldier under fire. But inside, each dismissal burned. They couldn't see past the word on her uniform, culinary specialist. They couldn't imagine that someone trained to feed troops might also be trained to fight beside them. On the final day, Caldwell delivered the board's findings. His voice carried no softness. "Petty Officer Lawson, this board finds that you did, without authorization, abandon your assigned post, enter combat operations outside your billet, and engage in unsanctioned actions that risked mission integrity. For this, you are formally reprimanded. This reprimand will remain in your record." The words hit like cold steel. Page felt her chest tighten, but she didn't look away. She had expected nothing less. Caldwell's voice shifted, deeper now, almost grudging. "However, this board also finds that your actions directly saved 12 Navy SEALs from execution, denied the enemy a propaganda victory, and demonstrated extraordinary courage under fire. For this, you are being recommended for the Navy Cross." The silence that followed was electric. Page's breath caught. A reprimand and a Navy Cross, the sting and the honor braided together in one impossible knot. Caldwell's gaze landed on her, hard and unblinking. "Understand this, Lawson. You've broken rules the Navy cannot afford to ignore, but you've also reminded us of something we cannot forget. Job titles don't define human capability. Actions do. Dismissed." That night the base felt different. Men who had once brushed past her without a glance now lingered. Some nodded silently. Others stopped to mutter a few awkward words of thanks. Chief Ramirez found her outside the chow hall, his hands shoved in his pockets. "You know," he said, his voice carrying a weight Paige hadn't heard before, "I was one of the guys who laughed at the idea of a cook being part of the fight. That's on me. I'll never make that mistake again." Paige didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed on the horizon where the desert stretched out endless. "Respect isn't given," she murmured. "It's earned. I knew that when I enlisted." Ramirez hesitated, then nodded. "You've earned mine, and the team, whether the Navy wants to admit it or not." For the first time in days, something softened inside Paige, a flicker of pride, not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind her father had spoken about when he told her that dignity doesn't need applause. Still, when she closed her eyes that night, she wasn't thinking of medals or reprimands or changed opinions. She was thinking of ropes snapping under a knife, of 12 men stumbling toward freedom, of a choice made in silence that would echo through her life forever. Because the truth was simple. She hadn't gone to war for recognition. She had gone because nobody else moved. And sometimes, the difference between life and death was whether one overlooked cook chose to stand up when the world stayed seated. What happens when the system can't ignore you anymore? Paige Lawson woke before dawn as she always did, the base still heavy with silence. She sat on the edge of her bunk, boots laced, uniform pressed, rifle cleaned and resting against the wall. Outwardly, nothing about her morning routine had changed, but inside everything had shifted. The reprimand was inked in her record, permanent, a scar on paper that would follow her for years. Yet alongside it sat a nomination for the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in combat. Few sailors ever held both marks. Fewer still carried them at the same time. It made her an anomaly the Navy couldn't quite categorize. And for an institution built on order, categories, and clarity, anomalies were dangerous. She felt it in every glance. Some officers passed her with faint nods of respect. Others stiffened, their eyes flat, unwilling to admit what she had done mattered. Around the mess hall, whispers followed her like a second shadow. "That's the cook who pulled the seals out. Should have been dead. Lucky, that's all." Lucky, 50 hostiles, 12 prisoners. That wasn't luck. Paige kept her head down. She never answered. She let the murmurs swirl because words meant little. She hadn't done it for them. She hadn't done it for recognition. She had done it because silence would have meant 12 men executed on film. Still, silence carried its own weight. Lieutenant Caroline Voss saw it. One afternoon, she called Paige into her office, her expression unreadable. "Lawson," she said, tapping a pen against a folder, "you've got a reprimand that should derail your career. But you've also got SEAL Team 7 lobbying every commander they can reach on your behalf. Chief Ramirez won't shut up about you. He's already submitted testimony recommending you for advanced training." Paige blinked, caught off guard. "Advanced training, ma'am." Voss leaned back in her chair. "Naval Special Warfare Pipeline. They don't usually open that door to support ratings, especially not culinary, but they're making an exception." The words landed like a shockwave. For years, Paige had hidden her skills behind aprons and serving trays. Now, suddenly, the Navy was offering her a chance to step into the fight openly. But there was a catch. There always was. "You understand," Voss continued. "If you accept, you'll be under a microscope. Fail, and they'll say the rescue was a fluke. Pass, and you'll spend the rest of your career being the proof that support personnel can cross into combat. You'll carry that weight every day. Are you ready for that?" Paige's chest tightened. Images flooded her mind. Her father's steady hands guiding hers on a rifle, the SEALs cutting their bonds, the disbelief in Ramirez's eyes as he asked, "Why are you a cook?" She swallowed. Her voice was quiet but firm. "Yes, ma'am, I'm ready." Voss studied her, then gave a single nod. "Then you'll screen next month." The screening was brutal by design. Weeks of physical punishment, tactical drills, and psychological pressure meant to break down anyone unfit for the rigors of special warfare. Paige wasn't naive. She knew many doubted her before she even stepped onto the course. Some candidates looked her over on the first day and smirked. "The cook, you've got to be kidding." She didn't answer. She ran harder, pushed longer, endured colder waters, heavier packs, sharper pain. Every time she felt her body screaming to stop, she remembered the ropes around those seals' wrists. She remembered the silence of waiting for permission while time ran out, and she pushed again. When they dragged themselves out of the surf after hours in freezing water, some men collapsed. Paige stayed upright, shaking, teeth chattering, but still standing. When they ran 20 miles under weight that bent spines, she kept her pace, her breath ragged but steady. The instructors noticed. They didn't praise her, praise was rare, but the absence of ridicule was its own recognition. One night while cleaning gear in silence, a candidate beside her muttered, "Thought you'd break first day." Paige didn't look up. "I've been breaking since I enlisted," she said softly, "but I don't stay broken." The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. The respect in his eyes was enough. Word of Paige's progress spread faster than she wanted. Back at Atlas, the whispers shifted. The cook who saved seals had become the cook who might pass the pipeline. For some, it was inspiration. For others, it was threat. Chief Ramirez visited during a training break, leaning against a post with that familiar squint in his eyes. "You're making waves, Lawson," he said. "The brass don't know whether to court-martial you again or put your face on recruiting posters." Paige smirked faintly, the first trace of humor in weeks. "I'll pass on the posters." Ramirez chuckled, then sobered. "Listen, you changed the way my men see things. Hell, the way I see things. But this system isn't quick to change. You're going to have to keep proving yourself over and over, long after most would have earned the benefit of the doubt. Can you handle that?" Her eyes held his steady. "I already have." For a long moment, Ramirez said nothing. Then he reached out, clapped her shoulder once. It was brief, but it carried weight. Respect given without words. When she passed the screening, the announcement rippled across commands. Some officers shook their heads in disbelief. Others nodded in quiet satisfaction. But for Paige, it wasn't about vindication. It was about doors opening, not just for her, but for everyone who had been boxed in by titles and assumptions. She entered naval special warfare as one of the first women to complete the full pipeline. Not as a cook who got lucky, not as an anomaly, but as an operator with a record etched in fire. Still, the transition wasn't smooth. Training beside seasoned fighters, Paige felt the weight of scrutiny everywhere. Men watched her movements, waiting for failure. She felt their eyes like a second skin. But she also felt something else, the silent pride of proving, day after day, that she belonged. Every round she fired clean, every mile she ran steady, every drill she completed without faltering. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was becoming. Back at Atlas, the culture had already started to shift. Cooks, logistics sailors, medics, support staff who had once been background noise, began requesting weapons training. Commanders, nudged by the fallout of Paige's rescue, started approving courses previously reserved for combat billets. The Navy, an institution slow to bend, was beginning to see the cracks in its old assumptions, not because policy demanded it, because one woman had walked into hell alone and forced them to look again. Paige knew she was still a controversy, still a question mark, but she also knew something larger was unfolding. Her choice to act had rippled outward, touching lives she would never meet. And in her quieter moments, she wondered, was this what my father meant all those years ago? That dignity doesn't speak, it acts. She thought of him often now, his voice guiding her through snow-dusted Wyoming forests, his steady patience when she trembled with her first rifle in her hands, his words echoing in her memory the night she chose to leave the kitchen behind. "When it matters, Paige, you move. You don't wait, you move." She had moved, and the world was still trying to catch up. Yet even with her future opening wider than ever, a shadow lingered. The reprimand in her record was a scar that would never fade. Some commanders would never forgive her for breaking the rules. Some doors would always stay closed because of it. But Paige carried it like she carried her rifle, heavy but necessary. A reminder that truth came with cost, that doing what was right was rarely the same as doing what was safe. She didn't regret it, because at night when sleep finally came, she still saw the SEALs' faces lifting with sudden hope. She still felt the dust under her palms as they climbed free of the compound. She still heard Ramirez's voice, incredulous but alive. "Lawson, what the hell are you doing here?" And she knew, no reprimand, no bureaucracy, no whisper of doubt could take that away. Because sometimes, the act of saving lives was its own kind of rank. And sometimes, the world had to learn respect the hard way. How long does someone have to prove themselves before the world believes? Paige Lawson learned quickly that passing the pipeline was only the beginning. Wearing the same uniform as special operators didn't mean she carried the same respect. In fact, in many ways, it made her target larger. On her first day reporting to her new unit, she caught the stares. Operators, broad-shouldered and hard-eyed, watched her walk into the ready room with a duffel slung over one arm. They didn't say much, words weren't necessary. The look said it all. "You're the cook, you don't belong here." She didn't respond, she didn't flinch. She set her bag down, sat quietly and listened. It was the same skill she'd honed for years in the chow hall, blending into the background, watching, catching details others missed. But blending wasn't enough anymore. Now she had to earn a place in their fight. Training never stopped. If anything, it grew harsher. The instructors weren't interested in her history. They didn't care about her medal or her legend. They cared about performance, and Paige knew that was how it should be. Every morning began before the sun with miles of running under punishing weight. Every drill demanded speed, precision, and coordination with teammates who still doubted her. Every mistake was magnified, every weakness a potential crack. The first time she lined up on the range beside her new team, one of them muttered under his breath, "Let's see if the cook can keep up." Paige ignored him. She locked into her stance, controlled her breathing, and fired. Her rounds landed clean, tight, steady, better than his, better than most. When the targets reeled back, the instructor didn't say a word, but the silence in the line spoke volumes. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She just reloaded and kept firing. Day after day, she did the same, letting her actions speak louder than their doubts. But inside, it wasn't so simple. Every night, when the barracks went quiet, she sat alone on her bunk with her hands resting on her knees, and the thoughts crept in. Am I enough? Will they ever stop seeing me as the cook? Will I always be proving forever until I'm broken? The doubts pressed heavy. She thought of women she'd served beside before, female Marines and sailors who had carried those same doubts like invisible rucksacks, twice the weight for half the recognition. She understood them now in ways she hadn't before. But then she thought of Wyoming. The ridgelines, the elk trails, her father's voice steady in her ears. You don't prove yourself with words, Paige. You prove yourself by still being there when the storm ends. And she pressed on. Her turning point came during a field exercise deep in the mountains. The team was tasked with a long-range infiltration, 3 days of movement across punishing terrain with little sleep and less food. The kind of test designed to grind the body down until only instinct remained. On the second night, a storm rolled in. Freezing rain cut across the ridges, soaking every layer of clothing, seeping into bones. By dawn, morale was cracking. Packs sagged, boots slipped, men cursed under their breath. Paige kept moving. Every step reminded her of Wyoming hunts, days spent tracking elk through snowdrifts, the cold biting her fingers until they went numb. She knew the trick wasn't to fight the cold. It was to endure it, to let it wash through without taking you under. When one teammate stumbled hard, cursing and clutching his ankle, Paige was the one who dropped beside him, shouldering part of his pack. "Get up," she said quietly. "You're not staying here." He glared at her, pride and pain clashing in his eyes. "I don't need help from." "Doesn't matter," Paige cut him off. "We're moving." Her tone was steady, not sharp, and something in it broke through. He got up, they moved. By the time they reached the final checkpoint, half frozen and hollow-eyed, the team knew one thing: she hadn't quit. Not once. Not when it would have been easier to. And that mattered more than history, more than titles. It wasn't acceptance yet, but it was the first crack in the wall. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the disbelief in their eyes shifted. When she cleared a building faster than expected in close-quarters drills, they noticed. When she patched a wound with the calm efficiency of a medic mid-scenario, they noticed. When she volunteered for the dirtiest jobs without complaint, they noticed. One night, sitting around after a long training op, one of the men finally spoke the words none of them had dared say aloud. "You're not just the cook anymore, Lawson." Paige met his eyes. Her face didn't change, but inside something loosened. The knot she had carried for so long eased, if only a little. She hadn't needed their approval. She had survived without it. But earning it inch by inch, day by day, still mattered more than she had admitted. Back at Atlas, the ripples of her rescue hadn't stopped. Support staff, cooks, logisticians, clerks, were being offered training slots they'd never seen before. Weapons ranges open to them. Tactical courses once locked away were now accessible. Not everyone supported the change. Some senior officers grumbled it was a waste of resources. "Support staff exists to support," one commander argued. "We don't need cooks playing commando." But others pushed back. Chief Ramirez's voice carried loudest. At a briefing before officer candidates, he said bluntly, "We nearly died because we assumed the cook couldn't fight. Lawson proved us wrong. Don't ever underestimate the quiet ones again." His words spread, carried on whispers through the ranks. Paige didn't hear most of them. She was too busy training, too busy proving, too busy carrying the weight of her own silence. But she felt the shift in the air whenever she returned to base. Cooks held their heads a little higher. Clerks asked more questions in training. Young sailors looked at her like maybe, just maybe, the boxes the Navy built for them weren't the end of their stories. Yet even as respect grew, Paige knew it was fragile. One mistake, one failure, and the doubters would be there ready to say, "See, she never belonged." That was the truth of her path. Every success lifted her higher, but every stumble threatened to erase it all. And still she walked it. Because she remembered that courtyard. She remembered the sound of rope snapping, the weight of 12 men's lives resting in her hands. She remembered what it felt like to act when nobody else could. And she knew this wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who came after. Late one evening, long after training had ended, Paige found herself alone on the range. The desert air was cool, the stars sharp against the black sky. She lay prone, her rifle steady, her breath slow. She squeezed the trigger, a clean shot, then another, then another. Each round landed where it was meant to. Each crack echoed back into silence. And as she lay there, a thought pressed into her chest, quiet, steady, certain. This is who I've always been. Not a cook, not a legend, just someone who refuses to let others die when I can move. Her father's voice came back to her, soft and certain. Dignity doesn't need to speak, Paige, it just acts. She closed her eyes for a long moment, her cheek still against the stock of her rifle. And she knew whatever came next, whatever storms waited, she was ready. Because the cook was gone. What remained was a warrior who no longer needed permission to exist. What happens when the legend has to live up to itself? The desert air was heavy with heat as the helicopter pitched low across the ridgelines, its rotors chopping through the night. Paige Lawson sat strapped in, helmet snug, rifle across her lap. Her heart beat steady, but her mind churned. This was no rescue born of desperation, no solo choice. This was her first real mission as one of them, as part of a SEAL element heading into hostile ground with her on the roster. And that changed everything. Her teammates didn't speak much. Operators rarely did before insertion. But their eyes flicked to her in the dim light, measuring, weighing. She had saved 12 of their own. She had passed every test. But stories were one thing. Missions were another. Out here, trust wasn't given for history. It was earned in seconds, in choices made under fire. The helicopter dipped, banking toward the landing zone. Paige clenched her jaw, staring into the blackness below. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the chance to prove she wasn't a fluke, that what she'd done in silence wasn't luck but skill. 2 minutes, the crew chief barked over the roar. The men adjusted gear, checked weapons, readied themselves. Paige mirrored their movements, her hands calm, precise. Inside, though, a voice whispered sharp, "If you fail now, every doubt they had will be confirmed." The bird touched down in a cloud of dust. Boots hit ground. The team fanned out, moving fast, low, silent. Paige fell into formation, her senses alive, every detail carving itself into her awareness: the crunch of gravel, the scent of oil from nearby machinery, the faint glow of lanterns marking the compound ahead. Their mission was simple on paper: seize a high-value target embedded in a fortified site, capture him alive, and extract. But nothing about it was simple in practice. The compound bristled with fighters. Intel was shaky, and one mistake could turn the night into a bloodbath. The team split, circling wide, setting up overwatch. Paige's role was clear: sniper support on the flank, eyes and rifle guarding their entry. She moved into position, low and smooth, settling behind her scope. The rifle felt like an extension of her own body, steady against her shoulder. Through the glass, the world sharpened. Guards paced along walls. A machine gun nest loomed at the gate. She adjusted her breathing, tracking each target, marking their rhythm. The radio crackled softly in her ear. Overwatch status. Her voice was calm. Eyes on, perimeter movement confirmed. Machine gun nest east side, I've got you covered. Copy. The team moved. Shadows slipping toward the walls, boots silent in the dirt. Paige followed them through the scope, her heartbeat aligning with their steps. She was part of them now, whether they believed it yet or not. Then it broke. A guard on the wall shifted at the wrong moment, his gaze catching the faintest flicker of movement below. His shout cut through the night. The compound lit alive. Voices barked, weapons raised. The silence shattered into chaos. Overwatch, take it. Paige's world shrank to her scope. Her finger tightened. One round cracked through the night, dropping the shouting guard before his second breath. She shifted instantly, sighting the machine gun nest. The gunner scrambled, swinging his weapon toward the breached team. Paige fired. The man slumped, the nest silenced before it could roar. Her voice stayed even. Gate clear, push. The team surged. Explosives blew the entry, walls cracking open. Operators poured inside. Paige kept firing, each shot precise, each threat cut down before it could converge. The courtyard erupted in chaos, but her men moved with the fluidity of training, trusting, reacting, alive. And for the first time, Paige felt something new. Not the desperation of acting alone, but the rhythm of belonging. Inside, the fight pressed harder. Radio chatter snapped fast, tense. Contact left. Room clear. Target not located. Paige shifted, scanning windows, doors, corners where muzzle flashes sparked. Her round stitched through the dark, opening paths, breaking resistance. She was part of the heartbeat now, her trigger pull saving seconds her team needed. Then came the voice in her ear, urgent. Overwatch, I've got movement northwest. Runner could be the package. Paige snapped her scope, caught the figure sprinting through the shadows. Not a fighter, no weapon. The face matched intel photos, the target. She exhaled slow, lowering her crosshairs. She could kill him easily, but that wasn't the mission. Alive. They needed him alive. Target sighted, she radioed, voice controlled. Northwest corner heading for vehicles. I've got eyes. Hold fire, we're on him. Two operators sprinted into frame, tackling the man hard, dragging him to the dirt. Paige kept her scope on them, guarding every angle. Fighters converged, shouting, firing wild. She answered with calm, clean shots, holding the world back while her team secured the target. Minutes stretched like hours. Then came the call, package secured, exfil now. The team pulled back fast, target bound and stumbling between them. Paige dropped her last cover shots, then slung her rifle and moved. She sprinted low through the brush, rejoining formation as they withdrew. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but her pace never broke. The extraction zone loomed ahead, the helicopters already thundering back in. The team loaded, dragging the target aboard. Paige was the last up, hauling herself into the bird as the rotors roared and lifted them away. For long moments, silence filled the cabin. The operators sat, weapons across their knees, eyes still sharp from the fight. The bound target slumped between them, cursing in a foreign tongue. Dust swirled, the smell of cordite lingering in their gear. Then one of the men looked at her, the same one who had muttered on the range weeks ago. His voice was quiet, grudging, but real. "Nice shooting, Lawson." The words were simple, but in them lay the crack of something bigger. Recognition, respect, even if reluctant. She didn't smile. She only nodded once, eyes steady. But inside, her chest eased in a way it hadn't in years. When they landed, debriefs followed as always. Reports filed, target processed, intelligence teams swarming. Paige stayed in the background as she always had, but this time she wasn't invisible. Ramirez caught her in the hallway afterward, his expression sharp but not cold. "That shot on the machine gun saved us, and the call on the target, most people would have pulled the trigger. You didn't. That's judgment, Lawson. That's trust." She met his eyes. "It's what I was trained for, even if nobody believed it." He gave a faint smile. They believe now. That night, lying in her bunk, Paige felt the exhaustion seep through her bones. Her muscles ached, her hands trembled faintly from adrenaline drained, but beneath the fatigue was something deeper. For years she had lived with the ache of being unseen, underestimated, dismissed. Then she had acted once, alone, forcing the world to look. But that had been survival, a desperate spark. Tonight was different. Tonight was proof that she belonged in the rhythm of the fight, not just in the margins of it. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, sleep came without the weight of doubt. Because she knew. The cook was no longer a shadow. She was one of them. And the war would never see her the same way again. What does it mean to leave a mark the world can't erase? Years passed. Missions blurred together in the endless rhythm of war, insertions in the dead of night, firefights in crumbling villages, rescues pulled from chaos. Paige Lawson was no longer a curiosity in the field, no longer the cook who got lucky. She was a teammate, a sniper, a combat medic, a leader who carried her share of the fight without hesitation. But even as she proved herself again and again, she never forgot what it had cost to get here. The reprimand remained in her record, a reminder of rules she had broken. The Navy Cross hung in her file as well, a reminder of lives she had saved. Together, they told the truth of her story, that the system had never known what to do with someone like her. And in that tension, change had begun. By her 10th year of service, Paige was invited to speak at training schools, not as a cautionary tale, not as a curiosity, but as proof. Young sailors, wide-eyed and uncertain, leaned forward as she told them the story she had once kept hidden. "When I first enlisted, people saw my rating and assumed that was all I was," she said to one class. "They saw culinary specialist and thought it meant I had no place anywhere but the kitchen, and I let them believe it. I stayed quiet. I worked hard, but I stayed in the background." Her gaze moved across the room, sharp and steady. But the truth is, every one of you is more than your title, more than the box someone puts you in. The day will come when the Navy or life asks more of you than the label on your chest. When that happens, don't let their assumptions hold you back. Show them who you are. Some of the young sailors nodded. Some simply stared. But she could see it in their faces, the spark, the hunger to be seen for more than what their paperwork said. And she knew the shift was real. Culturally, the Navy changed in ways nobody could have predicted. Support personnel were offered tactical training. Medics learned weapons handling. Cooks received marksmanship instruction. Clerks trained in navigation and survival. Not to turn everyone into operators, but to recognize that talent, skill, and courage didn't always match job titles. Chief Ramirez became one of the loudest advocates. At officer training sessions, his words cut sharp. We nearly lost 12 men because we assumed the cook couldn't fight. Never forget that. Talent hides in plain sight. If you don't look for it, you'll miss it. And one day, it might cost lives. His voice carried, but it was Paige's story that lived behind his words. For Paige herself, the years layered with victories and scars. She saved lives as a combat medic, patching wounds in the middle of firefights, her hands steady when chaos screamed. She made shots at impossible distances, her breath calm, her rifle true. She carried her pack, her weight, her silence without complaint. But she also carried the doubts that never fully faded. There were always whispers, always skeptics waiting to see her stumble. The weight of expectation pressed hard, and some nights it nearly crushed her. On those nights she thought of Wyoming. The long hunts with her father, the snow under her boots, the stillness of waiting for the right moment. She remembered his voice. Don't prove yourself with words, Paige. Prove yourself by still being there when the storm ends. And she endured. Eventually, her career rose higher than she had ever imagined. Lieutenant commander, later captain, she commanded not just missions but entire units. And when she spoke, men who once would have dismissed her listened in silence. At her retirement ceremony, 2 decades after that day at FOB Atlas, she stood in her dress uniform before rows of sailors and officers. The Navy Cross gleamed at her chest. Medals and ribbons lined the fabric. But her eyes weren't on the awards. They were on the faces in the crowd, young, old, male, female, who had grown up in a Navy different than the one she joined. A Navy that had learned, slowly and painfully, that worth wasn't defined by a rating badge. When the speeches ended, she stepped up to the podium. Her voice was steady, carrying through the hall. I never stopped being a cook, she said simply. Even when I picked up a rifle, even when I wore a different patch, that part of me never went away. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. But what I learned, what I lived, is that job titles don't define us. They never did. What defines us is what we do when it counts, when nobody's looking, when lives are on the line. The Navy tried to put me in a box, and for a long time I let them, until the day I couldn't anymore. Her eyes swept the room, finding the young sailors in the back. So don't let anyone decide for you what you're capable of. Don't let a label tell you your worth. You'll know who you are when the moment comes, and when it does, don't wait. Move. The room was silent, not with disinterest but with the kind of silence that comes when words strike too deep to be answered. Paige stepped back, her gaze calm. She had said enough. Later, standing alone outside in the evening air, she closed her eyes and let the breeze brush her face. The echoes of applause still lingered, but she didn't need them. She never had. Her mind drifted back to Wyoming. The ridges, the elk trails, her father's steady hand guiding hers on a rifle. His voice, rough and sure. Dignity doesn't need to speak, Paige, it just acts. She smiled faintly. He had been right all along. Because in the end, her story wasn't about medals or reprimands or even the dozen men she had saved that day. It was about the truth that had lived inside her since the beginning, the truth the Navy had taken years to finally see. That skill ignores titles. That excellence refuses to be boxed in. That the quiet ones, the overlooked ones, are often the ones who hold the line when everything else collapses. Sometimes the most dangerous figure on a base isn't the one with the loudest voice, the highest rank, or the chest full of medals. Sometimes it's the one dismissed as just the cook, the one who shoulders a rifle, walks alone into hell, and brings 12 men back alive. And sometimes, the greatest mark a person leaves on the world isn't what they say. It's what they do. In the years that followed her retirement, sailors still told her story, not as myth, not as legend, but as reminder. That hidden strength exists in unexpected places, that rules matter until they don't, that dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.